Your feet could be holding your psoas captive in a tight state that can't release, and I'm going to show you why today and what you can do about it. Every single step that you take throughout your life should have some degree of stretch of your psoas and also some degree of contraction depending on where we are in the walking gait cycle. When we are in late stance and the leg is behind us, this is stretching out the psoas and providing the psoas a bit of a cue and a trigger to then contract. And then that is going to pull the leg forward into swing and then allow us to set up for early stance. The psoas attaches on the lumbar spine and also here on the femur. So we understand it is a hip flexor muscle. It does this to the hip. Therefore, it is stretched when it is in a hip extended position like that. Now here's the key. Your psoas can only be stretched so much as you can get into a hip extended position. And your foot could be preventing you from getting into that position. When we strike the ground and we are in early stance, we are relatively in more of a higher arched position of the foot. But as we move into more of a mid-stance position, the arch is going to lower closer to the ground, and we're going to get what we call pronation of the foot. This pronation of the foot is very, very important to allow us to move into a hip extended position. So that way we can then transition into push off. Now, once we are in a push-off position, the foot does move into supination from that relatively pronated position. Now, you may be asking, well, then why aren't we focused on supination of the foot? And that's because good supination only is as good as the pronation that came before it. Interestingly enough, almost all muscles of your foot are supination muscles, meaning that they pull the foot arch up. So getting good pronation stretches them out to allow them to reflexively contract to push us forward. This is called the windlass mechanism. It's important to consider that muscles on the backside of our pelvis, like our glutes, are responsible for creating that hip extension. Now, hip extension naturally is going to stretch out the hip flexors, and it's really good to know too that when we pronate our foot and our arch goes down, that cues the glute to help create that hip extension. Let me give you a little bit of a visual demonstration. So when I take a step forward, let's say with my left leg, my psoas is in a shortened position. I'm in more of a hip flexed position. Now, once I start to get full flat foot, I am pronating my foot, and I have achieved maximal pronation once I get into this position right here where my other leg is off of the ground. Now, that pronation, again, is allowing me to load my body weight onto this side and get into hip extension. At this point, I am going to begin moving back towards that supination higher arch position where this is stretching out. But the thing is I can only get into this position if I can properly set up to get into that position. So I need to be able to properly pronate and get my body weight over this side first. Your push off or your move back into supination is only as good as your pronation can set it up to be. What I'm trying to say is that if we can't pronate our foot genuinely and effectively, I'm not talking about those people that necessarily overpronate their foot in a way that's not ideal. I'm talking about real good pronation, then we're not going to actually be able to fully trigger and get that stretch on the psoas. So we're going to be probably held captive in a relatively shortened position if that is our issue. So to recap, pronation is really important for two key reasons. The first is that it helps us yield into the floor because we're loading our body weight onto that side, and it cues the glute to work to create hip extension and then get that stretch on the psoas. There are two types of pronation. The first is good, healthy pronation, where we are getting this relative motion of the foot, as we call it. Good pronation is actually sort of a twisting in the foot, meaning that the back of the foot, the rear foot moves into eversion, and this heel kind of does this action right here. And the front of the foot, the forefoot, kind of twists out like that. So you get this motion like this. It is not the same thing as over collapsing or over pronation, as a lot of people look at it, where the whole entire foot just dumps in. That's generally not what we're talking about here. We want the first thing. So one way we can teach good pronation is through using wedges. Wedges help us accomplish the setup that will get us that nice healthy twist. And there's a good way that you can do that with basically any wedges. You don't need a specific type of wedge necessarily, but we do like to use Gary Ward's Anatomy in Motion wedges because they're specifically made for this type of thing. So shout out to him. This drill is also something that is inspired by him, and it's really good stuff. So here it is.
This is the pronation drill from Anatomy in Motion. To set up for this, you're gonna wanna have a pair of wedges. We recommend the wedges from Anatomy in Motion for best results. But if you don't have a pair of wedges, then we'll show you some alternatives to where you can still do this exercise. To set up for this, we'll have Connor stand in a split stance position with his back leg completely straight and his heel floating off the ground. We also want to make sure that his metatarsal heads stay put on the ground for the entirety of this exercise. For the placement of the wedges, we're going to want to place the largest one underneath his first metatarsal head, a smaller one underneath his fifth metatarsal head, and the final wedge is going to go underneath his heel at a 45-degree angle from the lateral side. We have about half of his heel on top of that last wedge. To initiate the movement, Connor's going to bend his front knee and shift his pelvis forward in space. That's going to start to put load into that right foot. Notice how he's keeping his back leg straight. What this is going to do is elicit a stretch in his hip flexor muscles. A couple common mistakes you'll see is as his knee travels forward, it may go too far to where he loses the heel. And on the back leg, he might lose the metatarsal heads, or you'll see the foot spin out as he goes forward. As Connor bends his knee and sends his pelvis forward in space, you'll notice that the knee travels right on top of that first metatarsal head. We need it to travel in this direction towards the inside part of his foot so that we can fully flatten out that foot. Looking at the back leg, as mentioned earlier, we want to have those metatarsal heads stapled to the floor, but if he holds this position for just a second and he externally rotates this whole leg, he'll feel a greater stretch through this hip flexor, and he'll also get this turn of the pelvis away from the lead leg, which will help him pronate more. To make this movement even more effective, we can add some motions at the upper body. So as Connor drifts forward in space, he can raise his left arm straight to the sky, and this is going to help produce a right lateral flexion through his spine to get more weight over the right foot. Additionally, he can add in a right hand supination, which will help him get some opposition in the transverse plane at his rib cage because the pelvis is going left as his rib cage goes right because of that hand supination. So as Connor goes into this motion, one thing we want to look out for is his head, rib cage, and pelvis staying on top of each other the entire motion, and that knee staying straight on the back side. We do want to actually have some spinal extension take place during this movement, so we can think chest up and pelvis forward or anteriorly tilted to put more weight onto that front foot.
If you want to link to different wedges, I'll link them down below in the description. I'm not affiliated with these companies at all. They're just good options for you. This is why it's so important to appreciate how different joints throughout the body can be influencing muscles further away from those joints. Everything really can't influence each other, and this is a major component of my beginner body restoration program. So if you want something that addresses a lot of these common movement dysfunctions and takes into account the head, the foot, the rib cage, the hips, all that good stuff, check that program out. It's linked down below in the description. I would recommend starting off with the basic progression, building up from there over a period of weeks. And I would probably start with just sets of 10 reps, trying to get 3 to 4 daily, and quality is definitely more important than quantity here. There's some really good cues in that video. It'll take you a while to feel it out if you're not in tune with your body, but pretty much anyone can do this. And you don't have to necessarily use the wedges, but I find they help quite a bit. So I encourage everyone to try the pronation drill first, but if that's not getting you the results you're looking for, depending on if your foot is in more of a flattened position or if you just have a lower foot arch, this may be more beneficial to you. So to keep this video concise, I will link that supination drill down below in the description. You can try that if the pronation drill is not getting you the results you're looking for.